تطلب وشية بالإمامة ثم غاوي الشية بدماها شية مجالي.
Well, after a week plus in Baghdad, I am now heading down to Najaf, which is one of the principal shrine cities south of the city that I went to 20 years ago, and I shot some amazing photos then, and don't have any expectations now. I just want to see how the city's changed and what it's going to be like. Leaving Baghdad on an overcast, rainy, surprisingly cool day. The weather's actually quite pleasant for how hot it's been, so I'm looking forward to this. I'm in a shared taxi, and should be interesting. A couple hours of being incredibly uncomfortable because my body's too big for the car, but excited for the journey. Along this wall are artist renditions of a new government complex here in the city, and curious to see how this is going to go. General Secretariat of the Council of Ministers. Says it's a 3-year-long project. I mean, there is a huge rebuilding boom here, but this project looks pretty serious. Unless they're getting some money and know-how from the Gulf, I don't know how realistic this is. And we're stopped at a petrol station here in somewhere in central Iraq. We're still about an hour outside of Najaf. So, though one thing about Iraq is that like travel times don't correspond with Google Maps. So it says this is a 2-hour and 14-minute drive from central Baghdad. But I think by the time we hit Najaf, it'll be about 4 hours. There's just an immense amount of traffic, and there's a good few checkpoints on the way here. Not too many, but there was one set of checkpoints that were about just 100 meters apart, and the second one I had to get out and talk to an officer and just explain who I was. I feel like you do need to know some Arabic to travel solo here. You've got to know at least a few words if you're not traveling with a group of people or any locals or anything like that. So I'm gonna get back in this tiny taxi and head to Najaf. 20 years ago next month, I came here to Najaf after I was in Baghdad. After the United States and United Kingdom initially invaded, the Shia religious seminary here were inviting foreign journalists to come to Najaf, and there was free room and board. And for how expensive Baghdad was at the time, that to me was all I needed. Of course, I was very interested in Najaf and its sister city, Karbala, which, along with Kufa, are known as the shrine cities of Iraq. And now I'm back 20 years later. The city looks and feels much different. There is an absolutely massive pilgrim tourism infrastructure here. And ashamedly, you can't see the golden dome of the shrine anymore. They've built this, I don't know, they've built this like sort of roof-like thing over the shrine. And, but still, the energy here is crazy. It's really powerful. In Iraq kind of reminds me of Iberian Catholicism in that It's very visual from sort of a photojournalistic standpoint. It's incredible. You come here to Najaf and all of this emotion, all of this vigor is on display.
لا تشيلونه شايل ضيم قلبي لا الدنيا غريبة الضبة وشية بالإمامة صبغة وشية بدماها شية بشار.
The fervor outside the Imam Ali shrine on just an ordinary Ramadan night. This day isn't anything special. It's incredibly powerful. When I first came to Najaf, it was like a volcanic eruption of religious expression. I mean, the Ba'ath Party ruled here for 35 years until its downfall 20 years ago in 2003. It had effectively ruled since 1968. Saddam Hussein had been in power officially, firmly, since 1979. And in those weeks after the invasion, there was this Shia revival that was one of the most incredible things I think I've ever witnessed. And especially, you know, in those early years of photography, I mean, it just doesn't get more visual than this place, you know, from just a kind of visual journalism perspective. It's really interesting to see how the place has changed. It's changed dramatically. There's signage and these roofs, and there's just so much going on. There are hotels everywhere, and I think when I came here on that first trip, I believe I was the only foreign journalist here. I definitely didn't see another Westerner. There might have been, there are probably journalists from Iran or maybe Bahrain or who knows, Pakistan or something. But there definitely weren't any other Westerners, and it was like I kind of had the whole place to myself. And I sort of feel that way right now. I don't see any other foreigners. I noticed there are pilgrims here from South Asia, from Shia sects there, just denoted by their shalwar kameezes and different modes of dress. And there are also pilgrims from the Arabian Peninsula. You can tell by their different dijdashas and kafiyas and hats and things like that. So it's wild to be back here. The magnificent shrine of Ali ibn Abi Talib here in Najaf is one of the principal holy places for Muslims following the Shia sect of Islam. And Ali was the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. Ali was married to Fatma, Muhammad's daughter. And to give you just a very brief overview without getting too much into it, because you can get very into the weeds with theological history in places like this. But Ali was the fourth and final caliph of the Rashidun Caliphate. And the Rashidun Caliphate, Rashidun means the four rightly guided caliphs. And the Rashidun Caliphate was the political entity that followed early Islam after the death of Muhammad. And there were four caliphs, and Ali was the final one. And then the Shia believe that Ali, who's buried here, was the first of the imams. There were to be 12 imams in total. And Ali was, the Shia believe that he was the rightly guided successor to Muhammad. And the Sunni believe that he was one of the four Rashidun. And this is what is known as Islam's Great Schism, which has divided the Muslim world into these two very broad sects today. And this schism has a lot to do with Iraq's politics. It has a lot to do with Iraq's relations with neighboring Iran, and to a lesser extent the Shia communities in eastern Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the Shia majority in Azerbaijan, and you have Shia who can afford it. You have Afghan Shia and Pakistani Shia and Indian Shia. This shrine is a place of deep spiritual pilgrimage for people of the Shia sect. And I mean, it's a visually stunning place. The energy here is mesmerizing, and it's also very welcoming. One of the, when I first came here in 2003, one of the principal differences that struck me between the Shia branch of Islam versus the Sunni branch is that, as most people know, that foreigners and non-believers have never been allowed in the modern era, until possibly now, according to some YouTubers, into the holy cities of Mecca and Medina in modern-day Saudi Arabia. But when I came here as a young photojournalist 20 years ago, I was very much welcome here in Najaf, as well as Karbala, where two of the other imams, Hussein and Abbas, are buried, and shrines were erected for them. So I'll try and cut it there. I don't want to get too much into it. This isn't necessarily a history channel per se, but just wanted to give a little explanation. I've always been fascinated by this place and what it means to, millions and millions of people in this part of the world. It's really interesting, and the architecture is gorgeous. When I first visited the shrine of Imam Ali in May of 2003, it was this kind of delicate period of openness and trust as Iraqi Shia were finally free of their Ba'athist oppressors after the regime had been decapitated by the United States and the United Kingdom. But that feeling really sadly wouldn't last very long here. Just a few months after my visit, there was a massive suicide car bombing here near where I'm sitting, actually, outside the shrine. And an Ayatollah named Muhammad Bakr al-Hakim was assassinated, along with like 85 or 90 other people. And at the time, because the Ba'athist regime had just been ousted, I think a lot of Shia thought that maybe it was the Ba'athists. But if it was a suicide bombing, of course that was not a Ba'athist tactic, and I think it was much more likely, and history bore out, that it was actually Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or what would later be known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, led by the Jordanian militant Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Al-Hakim led the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq. He was in exile in Iran during the Iran-Iraq War, and he returned to Iraq after the Western invasion. to be a part of this Shia revival. And he was killed here, and there were a number of other tragedies in those heady years in 2004 and 2005. Part of the reason why I mention this is that the first time I came here, you could just simply walk up to the shrine. There really had been no outsiders, and now there's security, quite friendly security. It's very gentle. It's not quite an airport, but there is security all over the place, and I think that's the legacy of that simply awful time of dehumanizing terrorism. And one of, at least to me, the key differences between the Shia and Sunni sects is that Shiism is very much about the visual representation of the human form, whereas Sunni Islam is very much against graven images traditionally. So that to me is a huge difference between the two, and it's part of why Shiism is more familiar, because the Catholicism that I grew up with, as I mentioned in my Baalbek video, is very much about the representation of the human form, whereas Protestantism, like as a kid I'd go into a Protestant church, it would pretty much just be white walls and some mellow stained glass windows. So I think there's kind of an adverse analogy here, at least in my opinion. And it's part of my interest in this society. All in all, I had a pretty amazing little night at the shrine. I wasn't able to go inside the actual shrine because I had my GoPro with me, and I had my power bank charger for my iPhone, because my phone was dead when I was leaving the hotel for this excursion, and neither was allowed inside the shrine, so I would have to leave them in the hotel and come back. But I just had this amazing interaction where I was talking to a ring vendor on the street, and years and years ago on my original travels, I used to love to get rings in these places, and I was trying on a ring, and this guy gave me, well, sort of gave me this turquoise ring from Najaf to complement my Afghan turquoise band that I've had for years. And I told him, I said, oh, I'll think about it, you know, I'll come back tomorrow, because I really actually was interested in the ring, but I just kind of wanted to think it over, partly because of my budget. And he just put it on my finger, and he said to me in Arabic, he's like, if you come back tomorrow, great, and if not, he's like, the ring is yours. And then I kept trying to put the ring back, and he kept putting it on my finger. I was like, oh man, I love this place. This is so great to be here. Oh boy, that moment just really touched me. Also, one just little side note, when I was asking the vendor the price for the ring, he was telling me in Farsi. And I said to him, I was like, Arabi min fadlak? I understood what he said in Farsi, but still I was like, I guess that's just the traffic they're used to getting here, which makes complete sense in terms of the religious tourism. But still, I was kind of surprised that he led with Farsi instead of Arabic. That was interesting. I just went to the supermarket to get some water to have for tonight and tomorrow, and I only had a 5,000 dinar note, and the man at the supermarket register said that he didn't have change or didn't want to make change, and just to take the water. And I was like, no, I can't take it. And he's like, no, just take it. He goes, I don't want to make change. So I just left with a free giant water. Some wild hospitality here. Boy, I miss places like this. I'm happy. I'm just so happy traveling again.